A legendary city once boasted a mountain of gardens built in the air. This vision of Babylon's hanging gardens has mesmerized the world for centuries, but its reality is one of history's most profound puzzles. By the end of our journey, you will possess the evidence to decide for yourself if this ancient wonder was a majestic fact or a beautiful fiction. We will confront a startling void in the historical record and investigate a rival city that may hold the true key. Were these gardens an impossible feat of engineering or a tale born from a simple mistranslation? What does our need for such a wonder tell us about ourselves? Nebuchadnezzar II ruled with an iron will and a builder's ambition. From 605 to 562 before the Common Era, his Neo-Babylonian empire became the undisputed superpower of its age, a realm of staggering wealth drawn from the control of lucrative trade routes. This king did not just collect treasures, he built them, transforming his capital into a spectacle of raw power. Imagine walking through the legendary Ishtar Gate, a structure coated in brilliant blue glazed bricks, adorned with processions of bulls and dragons that seemed to shimmer in the desert sun. The city's walls were so thick, ancient historians claimed 2 chariots could pass each other on top. At its heart stood the Great Ziggurat, a towering stepped pyramid that some believe became the foundation for the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. This was a civilization that measured its prestige in stone and mortar, where a king's legacy was cemented by the monuments he left behind. In such an atmosphere of extreme wealth and limitless architectural aspiration, could a mountain of terraced gardens have been just another project for the royal engineers? The resources were certainly there. The empire commanded vast reserves of labor, access to exotic plants from distant lands, and a sophisticated understanding of irrigation. Yet, when we search for a direct record of this specific wonder, the Babylonian sources are eerily silent. The detailed cuneiform tablets from Nebuchadnezzar's own court, which meticulously list his many building achievements, never once mention a hanging garden. This profound silence forces us to turn to a different group of storytellers, writers who chronicled the marvels of Babylon long after its golden age had faded into legend. These classical authors paint a picture of breathtaking beauty and engineering genius. Strabo described vaulted terraces, raised one above the other and supported by cube-shaped pillars. He wrote of hollow pillars filled with earth, allowing the largest trees to take root, and of water being lifted from the river by screws, an ingenious device that could raise water to the highest levels. Diodorus Siculus added even more detail, speaking of stone arches and a sloping structure like a theater, with gardens thick with every kind of tree, creating the illusion of a mountain landscape built by human hands. The motivation they all give is profoundly human, a story of royal love and longing. A powerful king, they say, built this green mountain to soothe the heart of his queen, a woman from the lush, green highlands of Media, who found the flat, sun-baked plains of Babylon desolate and depressing. It is a compelling and romantic origin, a gift of an entire ecosystem to cure a loved one's homesickness. Yet we must ask, how did these writers, living hundreds of years after the fall of Babylon and hundreds of miles away in the Greco-Roman world, come to know such intimate details? Their sources were not first-hand accounts. Berossus, the earliest of them, was a Babylonian priest, but his original texts are lost, surviving only in fragments quoted by later historians like Josephus. This creates a chain of whispered testimony, where each retelling might add a new layer of embellishment. These classical descriptions, for all their vivid detail, are not contemporary reports. They are echoes of a legend, recorded at a time when the wonders of the East were a popular subject for Greek and Roman audiences eager for tales of exotic, faraway splendor. The sheer romance of the story may have been as important as its factual basis, so we are left with a troubling question. If this wonder was so central to Nebuchadnezzar's glorious building program, why do his own meticulous records fail to mention a single stone or screw of it, while writers living centuries later can describe its very heart and soul? This profound silence from the heart of Babylon itself is almost deafening. We have thousands of clay tablets from Nebuchadnezzar's own court, each one a detailed invoice of his ambition. They list the exact number of bricks used in a temple. They record the dedication of a new gate. They boast of his piety in restoring a shrine. The king's scribes left nothing out because for an ancient ruler, these inscriptions were his eternal press release, his permanent claim to glory. To have built the Hanging Gardens and then never once mentioned them would be like a modern tech giant developing a revolutionary smartphone and then forgetting to put it in their annual report. It simply does not make sense. Could we have simply misunderstood the name? Perhaps the gardens were called something else in their time, a poetic term like the lifting of the heart that modern archaeologists have failed to connect to the legendary wonder. Or maybe they were considered just another luxurious appendage to the royal palace, a private greenhouse not grand enough for its own monument. But that feels like a weak excuse for a civilization that recorded everything. The absence of a single, definitive cuneiform reference is a hole in the story you cannot easily paper over. This great void in the Babylonian record, where we most expect to find our answers, forces the investigation to take a dramatic turn, to look toward a rival empire and a different king entirely. A revolutionary idea now turns the entire mystery on its head. What if for 2,000 years we have been searching in the wrong city? Oxford scholar Stephanie Daly presents a compelling case that the true location of the legendary gardens was not Babylon, but Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, built a full century earlier by the powerful King Sennacherib. Her evidence begins with the king's own words, etched in stone for eternity. Sennacherib's royal inscriptions boast of creating a, quote, wonder for all peoples, unquote, a vast garden complex he called the garden that is the wonder. He describes a monumental feat of engineering to supply it, including an immense aqueduct that brought water from over 30 miles away, and most strikingly, the use of what he called a new invention, bronze screws that could raise water in a continuous flow. This is a direct, contemporary description of the very technology the classical writers attributed to the Babylonian gardens. Supporting this written evidence are the stone panels from Sennacherib's own palace. These intricate bas-reliefs appear to show exactly what the texts describe: lush, tiered gardens, perhaps even supported by stone arches, rising on a steep slope beside his royal residence. The visual and textual records from Nineveh align with the later legend in a way the silent Babylonian records never do. Then there is the simple, undeniable logic of geography and water. Nineveh was situated near plentiful mountain water sources, making the constant irrigation of a massive garden entirely feasible. Babylon, by contrast, sat on a flat, arid plain, where lifting the enormous volumes of water required would have been a vastly more difficult, almost Herculean task. Daly's theory suggests a grand historical mix-up. In the centuries after both empires had fallen, Greek and Roman historians, viewing the ruins of Mesopotamia from a distance, may have simply conflated the two great powers. The fame of Babylon and its king Nebuchadnezzar eventually swallowed the memory of Sennacherib's earlier marvel, transferring the wonder to the more famous name. This is not just a minor correction, it is a challenge to the very foundation of the story, forcing us to ask not just if the gardens were real, but where they could have possibly existed. To judge this claim, we must look past the texts and examine the brutal physical realities of ancient engineering. The sheer scale of water required for such a garden pushes the limits of ancient possibility. To keep a mountain of vegetation alive in the desert sun would have demanded a river within a river, a constant, powerful flow lifted against gravity day after day. Classical writers spoke of screws, great spiraling devices turned by human labor, raising water from the Euphrates to the highest terraces, but the physics of this task are daunting. The energy needed to lift enough water, perhaps thousands of gallons every single day, to a height that could have reached over 75 feet, is almost unimaginable. It would have required a perpetual, grinding effort from an army of laborers, a logistical and human cost that seems unsustainable even for a king like Nebuchadnezzar. Then there is the structure itself. A garden is not a static building, it is a heavy, living, and constantly wet entity. The soil would have been saturated, creating immense pressure and demanding revolutionary waterproofing to protect the brickwork beneath from dissolving into mud. Classical accounts mention stone arches, a crucial detail because stone is strong and resistant to water. Yet stone was a luxury material in Babylon, a city built almost entirely from baked and sun-dried mud bricks. Why would a king go to the extreme expense of importing vast quantities of stone for a garden when his own records, which boast of using millions of bricks, never mention such a monumental quarrying operation? This is where the Assyrian alternative becomes so compelling. The engineering feats of King Sennacherib at Nineveh were not just advanced, they were precisely the kind of innovations needed for a hanging garden. His inscriptions celebrate a 1,600-foot-long aqueduct built to bring fresh mountain water to the city, a project that demonstrates a mastery over hydrology that Babylon might not have possessed. He even names the use of those bronze screws, an eerie and direct parallel to the later Greek descriptions. The water supply in Nineveh came from the mountains, flowing downhill by gravity, a natural and efficient system. In Babylon, every drop would have had to be fought for, lifted painfully from the slow-moving Euphrates. The physical evidence from Nineveh simply makes the engineering more plausible. But beyond the how lies the deeper question of why. Why would any king undertake such a monumental task? For Sennacherib, the garden was not just a romantic gesture, it was a powerful symbol of his empire's dominion over nature itself. It was a living display of his ability to command water, the most precious resource, and to reshape the very land to his will, a permanent advertisement of his absolute power. This understanding of motive completes the picture, transforming a mere architectural puzzle into a story of human ambition on a truly epic scale. The story of a king building a paradise for his lovesick queen is a beautiful one, but it might also be a convenient fiction. Ancient kings were master propagandists, and a garden of such impossible scale was the ultimate billboard. In the worldview of Mesopotamia, a ruler who could literally create a mountain and command rivers to flow uphill was not just a powerful man, he was acting like a god. This was a public demonstration of control over the very forces of nature, a message to his own people that their king possessed divine favor, and to his enemies that his resources were limitless. Think of it not as a private gift, but as a living, breathing collection of trophies. Every rare cedar from Lebanon, every exotic fruit tree from a distant conquest, was a physical piece of the empire on display. The garden was a map of his dominions, grown in soil and rooted in stone, proving he could gather the world's wonders in his own backyard. This transforms our understanding of the gardens from a tale of romantic devotion to one of calculated political theater. The primary audience was not a single homesick queen, but the entire populace and visiting dignitaries who would witness this marvel and report on its glory. This reframing of motive from personal to political makes the hunt for physical evidence even more critical. If the gardens were a central piece of royal propaganda, their remains should be substantial, designed to last and to impress. So where do we even begin to look for the ghost of a garden that has long since returned to dust? Robert Koldewey arrived in Babylon with a singular ambition to unearth its legendary wonders from beneath the sand. For 18 years, from 1899 to 1917, his team excavated the ancient city, and in its northeast corner near the Grand Ishtar Gate, they found something extraordinary. It was a complex of 14 vaulted underground chambers, built with a rare and costly stone foundation, and featuring a mysterious well with 3 separate shafts. Koldewey was convinced this was the substructure of the Hanging Gardens. He envisioned the stone chambers supporting the immense weight of garden terraces, with a triple-shafted well housing a chain pump, a mechanism capable of lifting vast quantities of water from the Euphrates River to nourish the plants high above. His announcement sent a thrill around the world. After centuries of legend, here was tangible proof, the very bones of the ancient wonder. Yet, as the initial excitement faded, other scholars began to scrutinize his findings more critically. The location was problematic. Greek historians like Strabo had placed the gardens on or near the river, but Koldewey's discovery was set back from the water's edge, making a massive irrigation system far more complex. Then there was the question of the structure's true purpose. Those vaulted chambers, with their thick walls and subterranean design, bore a striking resemblance to known storage facilities for grain or other commodities. The 3 shafts could have been for ventilation in a warehouse, not for lifting water. It appears Koldewey, a man of immense dedication, may have been swayed by his own fervent hope. He wanted to find the gardens, and so he saw a garden where others saw a granary. His interpretation, once celebrated as a final answer, is now largely considered a brilliant but mistaken chapter in archaeology. This failure to find definitive proof in Babylon, despite a decades-long dig in the most likely city, did not close the case. Instead, it shattered the consensus and flung the investigation wide open, forcing a radical reconsideration of where to look next. The hunt has now gone high-tech, shifting from the dusty plains of Babylon to the great mound of Kuyunjik in Iraq, the site of ancient Nineveh. Here, archaeologists are no longer just digging with shovels, they are seeing through the earth itself. Using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, they scan the vast ruin for hidden shapes, for the ghostly outlines of massive terraces, water channels, and storage basins that have been buried for millennia. These tools act like a medical scan for the landscape, revealing anomalies beneath the surface without ever breaking the ground. Guided by Stephanie Daly's meticulous analysis of Sennacherib's own inscriptions and palace reliefs, this technological search has a clear target. The ancient king's own words point to specific areas, describing his garden and the monumental engineering that fed it. Geological surveys have further mapped the bones of the land, tracing the paths of long-vanished canals and river channels that once funneled mountain water directly toward the city. This evidence from the local hydrology is critical. It shows a water supply system of immense scale and sophistication, one that could realistically support a vast, terraced garden without the back-breaking labor of lifting water from a distant river. No single piece of irrefutable proof has yet been pulled from the soil, no signpost that says Garden of the King. Instead, these non-invasive methods are building a powerful circumstantial case. They reveal a landscape that was not just inhabited, but aggressively and ingeniously remodeled by human ambition. the emerging picture is of an environment perfectly suited for the legendary wonder, a place where the physics of the story finally makes sense. This high-tech pursuit represents the new frontier of an ancient mystery, but it forces us to confront a deeper truth. Why has this particular story, whether fact or fiction, held such a powerful grip on our imagination for over 2,000 years? Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Hanging Gardens lies not in stone or soil, but in the human mind. Long after Babylon and Nineveh crumbled to dust, the idea of those terraced gardens continued to flourish, seeding itself deep into Western art and literature. Renaissance painters who had never seen a palm tree depicted lush, impossible landscapes suspended in the air, representing the ultimate triumph of human will over nature. They became a fixed star in the constellation of the Seven Wonders, a list solidified by Hellenistic writers that defined classical grandeur for centuries to come. This was not a list of verified tourist attractions, but a collection of ideals of dreams made stone. The gardens stood as the most poignant symbol among them, a perfect fusion of the wild and the built, a living monument that was both a celebration of love and a display of raw power. The story was simply too powerful to fade. It spoke to a universal longing for the sublime, for a world where human ambition could perform miracles, where a king's command could make a mountain of greenery bloom in the heart of a desert. This vision proved more durable than any brick or screw. It inspired the ornate garden labyrinths of European palaces, and it fuels the designs of modern vertical farms and green-covered skyscrapers today. The legend became its own reality, a cultural artifact that shaped our very conception of beauty and possibility. We are left then with a profound puzzle. Does the historical truth of the gardens even matter when their cultural truth is so undeniable? The myth has transcended the need for excavation, living on as a testament not to what was, but to what we have always believed we could achieve. This forces us to ask what we are really searching for when we hunt for lost wonders. Are we seeking a physical place, or are we chasing the echo of our own imagination? Language itself becomes a trapdoor in this investigation. The very word hanging might be our first and greatest misunderstanding. When Greek writers used the term kremastos, they likely did not envision gardens magically suspended in midair. A more accurate translation would be overhanging or projecting, evoking an image of lush terraces built on balconies or vaulted rooftops, a green crown atop a stone structure. This was not an unknown concept in Mesopotamia. Wealthy homes often had rooftop gardens, and royal palaces certainly featured elevated terraces for shade and beauty. The legendary wonder, then, could have been a spectacular magnification of a common architectural feature, a difference of degree, not of kind. This linguistic shift is crucial. It changes our search from a quest for the impossible to an inquiry into the magnificently scaled. The confusion deepens when we examine the ancient Akkadian language, the tongue of both Babylon and Assyria. Akkadian has multiple words for garden, each with a distinct meaning. One term might refer to a practical date palm grove, an agricultural asset vital for food and shade. Another, Kiramahu, described a luxurious royal pleasure park, a place of shaded walks, fragrant trees, and decorative ponds. If a later Greek historian, working from second- or third-hand accounts, mistook a description of a truly magnificent Kirama, who for something entirely new and unprecedented, the legend could have been born from a simple vocabulary error. A grand royal park could have been rhetorically elevated into a mountain of terraces through a cascade of mistranslations over centuries. Compounding this is the problem of place names. For many classical authors, the name Babylon was not just a city, it was a synonym for the entire exotic region of Mesopotamia. When they wrote of the wonders of Babylon, they could have been lumping together achievements from several powerful capitals, including Nineveh. A garden built by Sennacherib in Nineveh could easily have had its location blurred by time and distance, its fame absorbed by the more resonant and famous name of Babylon. We are left picking through a tangled web of words where a mistranslated adjective, a confused noun, or a generalized city name could have created a wonder that never existed in the form we imagine. This forces a difficult realization. The classical texts we have relied upon for so long are not a clear window to the past, but a prism, bending and coloring the light of history. With these written sources now shrouded in doubt, the only path forward leads away from the page and directly into the earth, to the silent, stubborn testimony of the land itself. The silent earth holds its own testimony, locked in layers of pollen and long-decayed seeds. Paleobotanists drill deep into the tells of Babylon and Nineveh, extracting slender cores of ancient soil in search of a ghostly garden signature. They are hunting for a botanical fingerprint, for traces of exotic species that had no business growing in the arid Mesopotamian plain. Finding the pollen of a cedar from Lebanon or the fossilized seed of an Indian fig tree would be the smoking gun, undeniable proof of a curated imperial collection. Yet the soils have been stubbornly mute. The cores from Babylon reveal the expected, the pollen of date palms and common local grasses, the very fabric of the natural landscape. The evidence from Nineveh is similarly ambiguous, showing nothing that definitively points to a wonder of the world. This absence is not a simple no. Organic material is fragile, dissolving over centuries. Constant irrigation would have washed pollen away, leaching the evidence from the very terraces meant to sustain it. The classical authors wrote of wide-spreading plane trees, a species native to cooler, wetter highlands. To keep such a tree alive in the desert heat would have required more than just water. It would have demanded a near-total mastery over a miniature climate, a feat of environmental control that seems to border on magic. This lack of clear botanical proof forces a difficult question. Could any garden, no matter how grand, leave no trace at all in the dirt? Or does this scientific silence whisper that the legend was always more verdant than the reality? Our modern vision of the gardens is a beautiful mosaic pieced together from centuries of artistic license. The Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, writing long after Babylon's fall, described a forest of towering trees growing on a man-made mountain, a description that added dramatic flair to the earlier accounts. But it was the artists of the Renaissance who truly set the gardens free from the constraints of reality. With no ruins to study and no knowledge of Mesopotamian architecture, they painted fantastical structures that seemed to float in the air, supported by impossibly slender columns and draped in vines, more a vision of a celestial paradise than a plausible ancient building. These paintings were not history, they were dreams, and they imprinted a spectacular and likely false image directly onto our collective imagination. This reinvention continued with every era. Medieval scholars depicted the gardens as a kind of wondrous house, a symbol of earthly delight. Victorian artists, living in an age of industrial marvels, reimagined them as a triumph of iron and steam, a testament to engineering will. Even our modern documentaries, with their computer-generated recreations, must rely on a series of educated guesses. An expert might consult on the type of arch that could have been used, or the probable slope of a terrace, but the final glowing animation is still an interpretation, filtered through our own technological pride and aesthetic sensibilities. We are always looking at the gardens through a distorted lens, one polished by the hopes and technologies of the present day. This relentless layering of interpretation makes the search for the original story feel like trying to find a single, authentic brick within a vast, ornately decorated palace built by countless hands. Each generation has added its own room, its own flourish, until the core foundation is almost completely obscured. To understand the legend, we must first understand this evolution of the image, consciously stripping away the artistic license to confront the raw, economic reality of what such a project would have truly demanded. The true cost of a wonder is not measured in gold, but in the sheer weight of human effort. To construct a terraced garden mountain, a king would have had to commandeer an entire economy. This was not a simple construction project, it was a logistical vortex sucking in thousands of men for years on end. Think of the artisans, the stonemasons, the carpenters, and the endless chain of unskilled laborers hauling materials under the desert sun. Their sweat was the first and most abundant resource. Then came the physical materials, each one a story of imperial reach. Vast quantities of rare timber, like cedar from Lebanon, would have been floated down the Euphrates on great rafts. Stone, an extravagant luxury in a land of mud brick, would have been quarried from distant hills and transported on sledges and barges, a slow and monstrously expensive undertaking. The gardens would have required tons of bitumen, a natural tar, to waterproof the terraces and chambers against the constant seepage of irrigation. And all of this material flow had to be managed by a sophisticated and ruthless bureaucracy, a network of scribes tracking every brick, every log, every basket of dates paid as wages. The royal treasury was the engine, but the empire's entire administrative machine was the fuel. We can search for the ghost of this effort in the economic records. The tablets from Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon are filled with such minutiae, listing rations for captive workers or shipments of wood for a temple roof. A sudden, unexplained spike in expenditure, a massive and prolonged drain on resources for a project simply called the King's Garden, could be the clue we need. Intriguingly, the Assyrian king Sennacherib's own inscriptions do something remarkable. They boast of the precise quantities of bronze he used to cast his revolutionary water screws. This is not just a king celebrating an idea. It is a king documenting the tangible, industrial-scale cost of his hydraulic marvel. In Babylon, no such record for a garden project exists. The lack of a logistical paper trail, of labor contracts or supply lists pointing to a singular, monumental garden, is another profound silence. The economic footprint of building the hanging gardens would have been enormous, an indelible mark on the ledgers of power. That we cannot find that mark in Babylon, while we can see its outline in the boasts of Assyria, forces us to confront a simple, brutal question. Which empire actually had the will, the wealth, and the administrative muscle to turn a legend into stone and soil? Placing the Hanging Gardens alongside its 6 legendary peers reveals a startling anomaly. We can stand before the weathered stones of the Great Pyramid at Giza, a monument whose immense scale and precision still defy easy explanation. We can walk through the excavated foundations of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, tracing the outline of a sanctuary so vast it supposedly dwarfed every other building of its age. The Colossus of Rhodes may be gone, but its existence is confirmed by multiple eyewitness accounts, and the logistics of its construction are recorded. Each of these wonders, from the lighthouse of Alexandria to the statue of Zeus at Olympia, was an undeniable physical fact, a landmark whose reality was witnessed by thousands. The Hanging Gardens alone stand apart, the sole member of this elite group whose location and very existence are shrouded in profound doubt. This is not a minor detail, it is the central clue to the entire mystery. The ancient scholars who compiled the definitive list of wonders were working within a Hellenistic worldview, a culture that celebrated grandiosity, artistry, and the seemingly impossible. For them, the story of a lush, green mountain built in the heart of a desert was the ultimate expression of human ambition taming nature. The tale itself was so powerful, so perfectly aligned with their ideals, that its factual basis may have been secondary. Including the gardens was an act of faith in a magnificent rumor, a testament to the idea that a story could be as wondrous as any stone structure. This context reframes our entire search. We are not just investigating a garden, we are investigating the criteria for wonder itself. The list was never a dry archaeological catalogue. It was a collection of dreams, and the hanging gardens were perhaps the most dreamlike of them all. Their enduring place on that list, despite all the unanswered questions, speaks volumes about what we, as a civilization, have always chosen to believe and to celebrate. Even the mightiest stone eventually submits to time and conquest. If the hanging gardens ever truly graced the skyline of Babylon or Nineveh, their path to oblivion was not a mystery, but an inevitability written into the very landscape of Mesopotamia. This was a violent crossroads of empires, a stage where rising powers proved their strength by erasing the wonders of their predecessors. Babylon itself, for all its grandeur, was sacked by the Persian king Cyrus in 539 before the Common Era, and later torn apart in the wars following Alexander the Great's death. But the fate of Nineveh was even more absolute. In 612 before the Common Era, a coalition of enemies stormed the Assyrian capital. They did not merely loot the city, they systematically destroyed it, setting fire to the great palaces with their carved stone reliefs and methodically demolishing the monuments. They sought to salt the earth of Assyrian power, ensuring nothing remained but a warning. In such a cataclysm of deliberate hatred, a delicate ecosystem of terraces and waterways would have been among the first casualties, crushed and burned beyond recognition. Beyond the torch and the sword, the land itself was an enemy. This region is seismically active, shaken by earthquakes that could have easily toppled the high, heavy structures required for a terraced garden. A single tremor would have been enough to collapse vaulted chambers and shatter the delicate balance of the entire system. And then there was the garden's lifeblood, its water. The sophisticated irrigation network, whether the bronze screws of Sennacherib or the legendary chain pumps of Babylon, was a masterpiece of constant, careful maintenance. The moment that maintenance stopped, the moment the engineers and laborers fled or were killed, the system would have failed, the water would have stopped flowing. In the brutal desert heat, the exotic trees and lush plants would have withered and died in a matter of weeks. Without their living roots to hold the soil in place, the terraces would have been vulnerable to the rare but torrential rains, which would have washed the earth away, turning the garden mountain into a crumbling, barren mudslide. The materials themselves were destined to return to the ground. These were civilizations built on mud brick, a resilient but ultimately ephemeral material when exposed to the elements. Sun-dried bricks, when deprived of protective plaster and exposed to water, simply melt away. The vast quantities of wood used for supports and scaffolding would have rotted or been scavenged for fuel. A structure made primarily of earth and wood does not leave a skeleton like a stone pyramid. It leaves a vague, indistinct mound, a whisper of its former shape. This perfect storm of human violence and natural decay offers the most pragmatic explanation for the emptiness we find today. The ruins were not just abandoned, they were actively obliterated and then patiently reclaimed by the desert. The lack of physical evidence is not a proof that the gardens were a myth. It is a testament to the sheer destructive force that was leveled against them. Their absence from the archaeological record is, in a tragic way, exactly what we should expect. This ancient archetype of the walled garden reveals a universal language of power. Long before the legend of Babylon took root, kings across the ancient world were cultivating their own versions of paradise. The Persian kings built vast, enclosed hunting parks they called paradisa, a word that literally means a walled enclosure and that eventually evolved into our modern term for heaven, paradise. In Egypt, pharaohs constructed elaborate temple gardens with symmetrical pools and rows of fragrant trees, representing their divine ability to bring order to the chaos of the desert. These were not merely pretty parks, they were potent political symbols. A lush, irrigated, and perfectly controlled garden was a miniature version of the kingdom itself, a living metaphor for a realm that was fertile, secure, and utterly dependent on the ruler's benevolence and power. The king was the master gardener of his entire domain. In this context, the hanging gardens, whether they ever existed in Babylon or not, become the ultimate expression of this age-old ideal. They represent the logical, if spectacular, endpoint of a ruler's ambition to not just imitate nature, but to surpass it entirely. This was not just about creating a pleasant retreat, it was about staging a dramatic performance of control. Imagine the message it sent to see a mountain of greenery thriving in the desert, a place where water defied gravity and foreign trees grew from artificial soil. It was a declaration that the king's power could reshape the very fundamentals of the world. This symbolic act touches on something deep within the human spirit, our eternal struggle to impose order on chaos, to cultivate beauty in the harshest of environments, and to use our ingenuity to transcend natural limitations. The story of the Hanging Gardens persists not simply because it is a tale of romantic love, but because it embodies a profound cultural memory. It speaks to an almost forgotten expectation of what a truly powerful and benevolent ruler should provide, a secure, prosperous, and beautiful world for their people. The legend answers a deep-seated yearning for a leader who can perform miracles, who can turn a barren landscape into a paradise. This is why the factual truth of the gardens may be, in the end, almost secondary. Their greatest legacy is not in the soil of Iraq, but in the landscape of our imagination. They live on as a timeless symbol of aspiration, a challenge from the past that continues to inspire us to reach for the seemingly impossible. The search for the gardens has never been confined to a single map. When the dominant theories of Babylon and Nineveh leave so many questions unanswered, the human imagination naturally wanders to other possibilities. One alternative points to Nimrud, another grand Assyrian capital. Here, royal inscriptions also speak of elaborate gardens and monumental waterworks, suggesting the creation of green spaces was a widespread obsession among Mesopotamian rulers. Perhaps the legend is not tied to one specific garden, but is a composite memory of several magnificent royal parks, with the fame of the Hanging Gardens eventually absorbing them all. Another compelling idea suggests we have been looking for the wrong kind of structure entirely. What if the gardens were not a separate entity, but a spectacular misreading of Babylon's own great ziggurat, the Etemenanki? This colossal stepped pyramid, often linked to the Tower of Babel, was the spiritual heart of the city. Its immense terraces, if they were planted with trees and shrubs as some scholars speculate, could have presented a breathtaking sight. From a distance, especially to a foreign traveler, this towering, green-crowned mountain might have been described as a hanging garden, its man-made tiers creating the illusion of an elevated paradise. This theory elegantly solves the problem of the missing Babylonian records, because the ziggurat itself is one of the most well-documented structures in the city's history. Then there are the more speculative frontiers of thought. Some propose the gardens utilized a now-lost technology for lifting water, something more advanced than screws or chain pumps, an innovation so revolutionary its principle was forgotten. Others argue that the entire account is simply a massive exaggeration of a standard royal pleasure garden, a common feature in any Mesopotamian palace that grew in the telling with each generation of Greek historians. While these fringe ideas lack the archaeological weight of the mainstream theories, they serve a vital purpose. They remind us that the boundaries of history are not fixed, and that a mystery this profound naturally generates a spectrum of answers. The persistence of these alternatives underscores a simple truth. We are so captivated by the idea of the hanging gardens that we are willing to rewrite the map and reinterpret the texts, all in pursuit of a wonder that continues to shimmer just beyond our grasp. The very ground we walk on is woven with stories of identity. For the nation of Iraq, the legend of the Hanging Gardens is not just a historical puzzle. It is a vital thread in the fabric of its cultural heritage, a direct link to a time when its land was the center of the world. This connection has manifested in stone and mortar at the site of Babylon itself, where extensive reconstruction projects under previous governments aim to resurrect the glory of Nebuchadnezzar's capital. New walls and gates have risen, stamped with the insignia of modern authority, creating a physical landscape that loudly proclaims a Babylonian past. In this context, claiming the Hanging Gardens as a Babylonian achievement becomes a powerful act of national pride. It anchors the modern state's identity to one of the most famous and celebrated civilizations in all of human history. The narrative is compelling, a story of Iraqi ingenuity and power that echoes across millennia. This political dimension inevitably shapes the archaeological discourse. There is a natural, deeply human preference for the traditional location, for a story that reinforces a continuous and glorious lineage. The potential reassignment of the wonder to Nineveh, however, introduces a subtle but significant shift. While Nineveh's ruins also lie within Iraq's borders, this theory transfers the glory from the Babylonians to the Assyrians. To an outside observer, this might seem like a minor detail, a simple change of address within the same country. But these were two distinct empires with different languages, different gods, and different historical legacies. Celebrating an Assyrian wonder over a Babylonian one is not a neutral act. It is a choice that highlights a different branch of Iraq's immensely rich and complex ancestry. This modern stake in an ancient outcome is a powerful reminder. Archaeology is never conducted in a vacuum, separate from the tides of contemporary identity and politics. The questions we ask of the past are often reflections of the needs and conflicts of the present. The search for a lost wonder becomes entwined with the very human desire to claim a piece of its glory, to see our own reflection in the shimmering mirage of history. These digital blueprints breathe life back into ancient words and weathered stones. Without a single surviving terrace to measure, architects and engineers now use sophisticated modeling software to build the gardens from the ground up, entirely within the virtual realm. They input the specific details from Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, the dimensions of the vaulted chambers Koldewey found, and the specifications from Sennacherib's own inscriptions. The software then does what a human mind cannot. It calculates the immense physical forces at play. It simulates the relentless pressure of tons of saturated soil pressing down on brick arches over centuries. It models the flow of water through hypothetical screw pumps and canal systems, revealing bottlenecks and failures that an ancient engineer might have missed. These models become dynamic testing grounds, not static pictures. A design based on the Babylonian location might show that lifting enough water from the Euphrates would require an army of laborers working in shifts 24 hours a day, a logistical nightmare that pushes the bounds of credibility. Another model, built from the Assyrian descriptions, can demonstrate how gravity-fed channels from the mountains could deliver a continuous, manageable flow to the highest terraces with startling efficiency. We can watch sunlight travel across the digital terraces throughout the day, understanding which plants would have thrived and which would have withered in the shade. We can stress the virtual stone foundations to their breaking point, discovering exactly how much weight they could bear before collapsing. These are not just pretty animations for a documentary, they are rigorous experiments. They allow us to ask the stones a question even when the stones are gone. By virtually reconstructing Robert Koldewey's underground chambers, for example, we can test his granary theory against his garden theory, loading the digital vaults with the immense weight of deep soil and mature tree roots to see if the structure would have crumbled. The result is a new kind of evidence, one born from silicon and simulation. It cannot tell us the gardens were definitely there, but it can tell us with startling precision whether a specific version of them could have physically stood at all. This digital archaeology transforms abstract debate into a tangible engineering challenge, forcing the legend to confront the unforgiving laws of physics. A blueprint for paradise was carved into hillsides long after Babylon turned to dust. The legend of the Hanging Gardens did not vanish with the city. It simply migrated, taking root in new soils and inspiring a lineage of earthly paradises. Persian garden architects were among the first to codify this vision, transforming the idea of a terraced green mountain into a sacred geometry. They created the Chahar Bog, the quintessential four-part garden, a walled enclosure divided by water channels symbolizing the four rivers of paradise. These were not wild, untamed landscapes, but perfect, orderly reflections of a cosmic ideal, where the presence of water and shade in an arid land was the highest form of luxury and divine favor. This architectural philosophy, born from the same environmental challenges as the Mesopotamian legend, spread with Islamic culture, its principles blossoming in the courtyards of Spain's Alhambra, with its delicate fountains and myrtle hedges, and reaching a sublime peak in the grounds of India's Taj Mahal, where the reflecting pools and planted quadrants create a perfect, serene balance. The ghost of Babylon was walking, its form evolving but its essence remaining, a persistent dream of a controlled, elevated Eden. Centuries later, European nobility, rediscovering the classical texts of Greece and Rome during the Renaissance, became enchanted by the same stories. They read the accounts of Strabo and Diodorus and saw a challenge from antiquity. On the steep hillsides of Italy, they constructed vast, multi-level gardens like those at the Villa d'Este, where terraces were supported by immense retaining walls and animated by gravity-fed fountains and water staircases. These were explicit, deliberate attempts to resurrect the glory of the Hanging Gardens, to prove that modern engineering and classical learning could together recapture a lost wonder. The owners of these estates were not just cultivating plants, they were cultivating a connection to an ancient and illustrious past, using the landscape itself to claim a piece of that legendary grandeur. This enduring influence reveals a profound truth. The most significant legacy of the Hanging Gardens may not be a pile of stones waiting to be found, but a powerful idea that has shaped our very conception of beauty and tranquility for thousands of years. It is a ghostly blueprint that guided the hands of gardeners and architects across continents and epochs, proving that a compelling story can, in the end, mold reality long after its own facts have faded into mystery. So we arrive at the heart of a modern scholarly stalemate, a fascinating intellectual tug of war. The traditional Babylonian theory, once held as gospel, now stands on shaky ground, its foundation eroded by the very silence it was meant to fill. Robert Koldewey's passionate identification of those vaulted chambers as the garden's base is viewed today with deep skepticism, seen more as a product of wishful archaeology than hard evidence. The complete absence of any mention in Nebuchadnezzar's own meticulous records is a hurdle too high for many to ignore. In response, Stephanie Daly's Assyrian hypothesis has surged as the most compelling alternative, weaving together Sennacherib's own boasts of bronze screws and aqueducts into a coherent and plausible narrative. This theory has rightfully gained a strong and respected following, yet it too faces its own evidentiary wall. No inscription from Nineveh has yet been found that explicitly names the structure as the Hanging Gardens of later legend. No unmistakable, undeniable garden terrace has been unearthed that perfectly matches the classical descriptions. The debate has therefore settled into a respectful but firm disagreement, a lively conversation that continues in academic papers and conference halls. The consensus, if one can be called, is that the Greek and Roman writers were not simply inventing from whole cloth. They were likely describing a real and magnificent garden, a wonder in its own right that once existed somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. But its exact identity, its precise location, and its true scale have been lost in translation, both linguistic and cultural, over the centuries. This lack of a final answer is not a failure of archaeology, but rather a testament to the enduring power of the mystery itself. The pursuit is the point, a shared passion that keeps the legend alive, pushing us to look deeper and question harder. Where does this leave our search for truth when both stone and text refuse to yield a final verdict? This potent blend of history and legend is exactly what keeps the story alive in our modern world. We are drawn to the very same elements that captivated the ancient Greeks: a powerful king, a romantic gesture, and a technological marvel that seems to defy its own time. It is a historical mystery that feels uniquely solvable, a cold case where a single new tablet or a clever satellite image might finally crack it wide open. This accessibility invites everyone to the table. Professional archaeologists with ground-penetrating radar work alongside amateur historians scouring digital archives, while television documentaries present the latest theories to millions of viewers at home. Each new book or magazine article on the topic, each special that promises a new clue, fuels a continuous media cycle. This cycle does more than just inform. It actively sustains the mystery in our collective imagination, turning an ancient architectural question into a living, breathing puzzle. The gardens represent more than a lost building. They symbolize a lost world of human achievement and beauty, a paradise that was, by its very nature, fleeting. Its legendary ephemerality, the idea that such splendor could simply vanish, makes the search for it feel urgent and profoundly meaningful. We are not just hunting for ruins, we are chasing the ghost of beauty itself, and that is a quest that never grows old. The silence of the ruins may yet be broken by the hum of new machines. The search for the Hanging Gardens is entering a new era, one where our travels are guided by eyes that can see through stone. Future excavations, particularly in the less explored precincts of Nineveh, hold the promise of a definitive discovery. Imagine a technology that uses the very particles raining down from space to create an X-ray vision of the Earth. This is muon radiography, a technique that tracks cosmic rays as they pass through dense structures. These muons are absorbed differently by solid rock versus hollow chambers or layers of soil. By deploying detectors around a site like Kuyunjik, archaeologists could, in theory, generate a three-dimensional map of any hidden vaults, tunnels, or vast subterranean cavities deep beneath the surface, all without ever breaking the ground. It would be like seeing the ghost of the foundation. Alongside this, the very soil itself is learning to speak. Improved chemical analysis can now detect the faintest traces of ancient activity. A specialized garden filled with exotic plants from distant lands would have required specific fertilizers and soil amendments not found in the local environment. A detailed core sample analyzed with this new precision might one day reveal a unique chemical fingerprint, a persistent anomaly of phosphates, nitrates, or rare minerals that screams of intensive, non-native cultivation. This would be the botanical equivalent of finding a signature. The greatest hope, however, lies in the prospect of peace. As political situations in Iraq continue to stabilize, the door opens for the kind of sustained, meticulous archaeological work that such a complex mystery demands. Longer, more secure field seasons would allow teams to follow a single clue for years, to excavate not just for treasure, but for understanding. The mystery of the Hanging Gardens remains one of history's most tantalizing open cases, a puzzle that has defied centuries of inquiry. Yet the next breakthrough might not come from a grand discovery, but from a quiet moment in a lab, from a new way of reading an old text, or from a single, revealing scan. It is a pursuit driven by an unwavering belief that the truth is still out there, patiently waiting for the right question to be asked. Our journey through the rise and ruin of Babylon's Hanging Gardens reveals a story far more complex than a simple tale of a lost wonder. We have navigated the shaky ground of classical accounts, confronted the profound silence of Babylonian records, and weighed the compelling evidence for an Assyrian alternative in Nineveh. We have seen how immense engineering challenges, stark economic realities, and the raw power of myth have all shaped this enduring legend. While we may never know with absolute certainty if the gardens existed in the precise, terraced form we picture, their undeniable impact on our culture, our art, and our very understanding of human ambition cannot be erased. They stand as a permanent question mark in history, a beautiful enigma that refuses to be solved, and perhaps that is the point. Some mysteries are valuable not for the answers they provide, but for the endless curiosity they ignite. They remind us that the past is not a sealed book, but a living conversation. The real, lasting wonder may not be a garden of stone and soil, but the relentless human drive to keep exploring, questioning, and reaching for the sublime, a drive that the legend of the Hanging Gardens continues to fuel across the